Alara walked into the Blackthorn Great Hall, expecting a council feast. Instead, she walked straight into her own humiliation. The moment the massive doors opened, her steps stopped beneath the archway. Hundreds of nobles were already seated beneath the moonstone chandeliers, but no one looked at the musicians, the wine, or the silver banners hanging above the throne. Every face turned toward her. Then Alara saw why. Her chair beside Alpha King Kale's throne was occupied by another woman. Lady Seraphine Ravencroft sat there with one hand resting on the carved wolf armrest, as if the seat had always belonged to her. Around her shoulders hung Alara's ceremonial Luna cloak. At her throat gleamed the moonfire necklace Kael had given Alara on the night of their mating vow. And beneath Seraphine's crimson gown, one hand rested deliberately over the small curve of her stomach. Alara did not move. For several seconds, the entire hall seemed to narrow until there was nothing left except Seraphine sitting beside Kael. Then her eyes dropped to the bottom of the throne steps. A smaller chair had been placed there among the wives of lesser nobles. Alara's silver nameplate rested on it. Her Luna crest had been removed from the royal dais. Someone had not simply insulted her tonight. Someone had rearranged the entire hall to show every alpha in Blackthorn that she had already been replaced. Alara slowly lifted her gaze to Kael. He sat on the black throne with his hands closed around the armrests, dressed in full royal armor. Their eyes met. He looked uncomfortable. He even looked angry. But he did not rise. He did not order Seraphine out of her seat. He did not ask why his mate had been placed below the throne. That silence hurt more than the scene itself. Alara had known Seraphine wanted her place. Everyone knew. Since returning to Blackthorn 3 weeks earlier, the woman had sat too close to Kael at council meetings, spoken over Alara at diplomatic dinners, and repeatedly reminded the court that her Ravencroft blood was older and stronger than anything a border-born Luna could offer. Kael had dismissed every complaint with the same excuse. Blackthorn needed Seraphine's father and his northern army. Alara had swallowed each humiliation because war was gathering beyond the mountains and innocent wolves would pay if the alliance failed. But this was different. This had been prepared. The chair, the necklace, the cloak, the watching court. Kael had known what she would walk into tonight, and he had allowed her to enter without warning. Seraphine finally rose, slowly enough to draw every eye toward the curve beneath her gown. A satisfied smile touched her lips as she lifted an empty goblet toward Alara. Since tonight celebrates the future of Blackthorn, perhaps our Luna should pour the blessing wine. A murmur passed through the tables. No one missed the meaning. For days, whispers had spread that Seraphine was carrying the Alpha King's heir. Kael had never confirmed it, but worse, he had never denied it. Alara looked at him one more time. She gave him a chance without saying a word. One command from Kael could end this. Instead, his jaw tightened, and his expression gave her the answer she had feared. Endure it. Do not make a scene. Not in front of Ravencroft. Alara walked forward. Each step toward the throne felt heavier than the last. She passed Alpha Lords whose wounded sons she had once nursed after battle, merchants whose families she had saved from winter famine, and elders who had begged her to negotiate peace when Kael's temper nearly started a war. Now they watched her approach another woman seated in her place. A servant handed Alara the wine pitcher with trembling hands. Seraphine leaned closer as Alara began pouring. "Careful," she whispered, smiling into the goblet. "A Baron Luna should at least learn how to serve the woman carrying her king's child." Alara's hand stopped. The red wine trembled against the rim. Somewhere inside her, a wound she had spent years hiding tore open again. Kael had no idea that the silver blade Alara once took for him had cost her their first unborn child. He had no idea that she had carried that grief alone, so he would never look at himself and see the reason. Kael heard Seraphine. Alara knew because his eyes immediately shifted toward them. For one heartbeat, hope betrayed her. She thought he might finally stand. Instead, Lord Varric bent toward the throne and whispered something about the northern troops waiting for Blackthorn's answer before dawn. Kael's gaze hardened. He looked away. Alara finished pouring the wine. That was the moment something inside her changed. Not because Seraphine was cruel. Cruelty from an enemy was easy to understand. But Kael had listened to another woman mock the deepest wound of his own mate and decided that stopping it might cost him too much politically. Alara placed the pitcher down carefully. She would remember that calculation long after she forgot Seraphine's smile. Then Elder Corvin pushed himself to his feet. The old Alpha's expression was rigid with outrage. "Your Majesty, What are we witnessing? The hall fell quiet again. Corvin pointed toward Seraphine, then toward Ilara standing below the throne. Lady Ravencroft sits in the Luna's seat. She wears the Luna's cloak. She carries the Luna's jewels, and this court is being encouraged to believe she bears your heir. Meanwhile, your true Luna stands before us like a guest in her own palace. Seraphine's smile sharpened. Varric watched KL closely. Corvin's voice lowered. If Lady Ravencroft is now the woman beside your throne, then tell the 12 packs plainly. What is Ilara Vale to their king? Ilara looked directly at Kale. She remembered another night years earlier beneath the moon tree, when he had pressed his forehead against hers, and promised that no crown would ever make him ashamed of the woman the moon goddess had chosen for him. She remembered selling her mother's last lands to feed his soldiers. She remembered carrying water through a battlefield while arrows struck the ground around her. She remembered every time she had chosen his kingdom, even when it cost her something. Kale knew those things. He knew enough of them, at least, to answer differently. But the hall was full of powerful men, Ravencroft warriors, and whispers that his Luna controlled him. Kale leaned back against the throne. A cold scoff left his mouth. She means nothing to me. The words did not make Ilara cry. That would have been easier. Instead, all the warmth left her face. The hall disappeared around her, replaced by the terrible clarity of understanding. Kale had not merely failed to protect her. He had chosen to destroy her dignity because it made him look stronger. Ilara slowly reached for the Luna ring on her finger. Kale's expression changed the instant he saw what she was doing. She pulled the ring free, walked up the throne steps, and placed it beside his goblet. The tiny sound of silver touching stone seemed to echo through the entire hall. Ilara, Kale said, and for the first time that night, uncertainty entered his voice. She looked at him without tears. Before sunrise, Your Majesty, you will understand exactly what nothing has been holding together. She turned and walked away before he could answer. Seraphine's smile weakened. Beta Rowan watched Ilara descend the steps and noticed her hand press protectively against her abdomen for only a second. No one else understood the gesture. No one in that hall knew that 3 weeks earlier, High Priestess Malus had confirmed that Ilara was carrying Kale's child. No one knew that the young maid who delivered Ilara's pregnancy herbs had been found dead beneath the eastern tower the following morning. And no one knew that Ilara had already uncovered altered medical records, missing servants, and letters suggesting someone inside Blackthorn wanted the Alpha King's true heir dead before birth. Seraphine's rumored child was not the secret Ilara feared. The child growing beneath Ilara's heart was. If you enjoy stories where betrayal finally becomes more expensive than loyalty, stay with this one, because this night had only begun. Ilara left the Great Hall and went directly to the abandoned Luna Council chamber. There, beneath a loose stone, she removed a wooden box containing everything she had gathered. The black cord found on the murdered maid, copied physician records, intercepted letters, and 6 names belonging to palace servants who had died under suspicious circumstances. At the bottom lay a new document bearing Kael's royal seal. At sunrise, Ilara Vale would be formally stripped of her title. Seraphine Ravencroft would be recognized beside the Alpha King, and the child she carried would be declared Blackthorn's future heir. Ilara placed one hand over her own hidden child and stared at the decree. Someone wanted a false heir crowned. Someone wanted the true one buried, and Kale had just made their work dangerously easy. By midnight, Seraphine had already begun erasing Ilara from the palace. Servants loyal to the Luna were dismissed from the western wing. Ilara's gowns were carried from the Luna chamber and left in cedar trunks along the corridor. Her books, letters, and personal seals were removed from the council room as if someone feared even the memory of her authority. Seraphine supervised it all with the calm satisfaction of a woman rearranging furniture in a house she believed she had inherited. When Ilara finally returned to the royal wing, she found 2 guards standing outside her own chamber. Behind them, maids were changing the bed linens while Seraphine's perfume already hung in the air. Kael's order had been clear. Until the sunrise ceremony, Ilara would be moved to the eastern guest rooms to avoid further conflict. He had called it temporary. To Ilara, it felt like burial. She stood before the open doorway and stared at the room that had held the best and worst years of her marriage. It was where Kael had carried her after the silver attack, where she had spent nights pressing cold cloth to his fevered skin, where she had once woken alone in a pool of blood and realized the tiny life inside her was gone. Seraphine appeared behind the guards, wearing Ilara's pale sleeping robe loosely over her shoulders. "You should be grateful," she said. "Most discarded mates are thrown outside the walls. Alara turned slowly. Most women who steal another Luna's bed are at least ashamed enough to wait until the body is cold. Seraphine's smile thinned. For the first time, Alara saw anger beneath the confidence. Good. Cruel people were easiest to read when denied the pleasure of watching someone break. Kale found Alara less than an hour later in the Eastern Council chamber, surrounded by papers and sealed letters. He entered without knocking, anger preceding him like heat before fire. "What have you done?" he demanded. Alara did not look up immediately. "You will have to be more specific." Kale slammed 3 documents onto the table. Silverfang had suspended troop support. Moonridge had withdrawn grain wagons from the northern road. 2 merchant houses had demanded immediate repayment on wartime loans. These agreements were made under the Blackthorn crown. Alara finally raised her eyes. "No. They were made under my personal guarantee because those alphas did not trust you after the succession war." The truth hit him hard enough to silence him. She continued, "I did not order anyone to betray you. I informed them I would no longer stand behind promises made by a king who publicly declared I meant nothing." Kael's expression darkened. "People could starve because of this." "People almost starved 3 winters ago," Alara replied. "Do you remember who rode through a snowstorm to negotiate grain from Moonridge while you were fighting in Grey Pass? Do you remember who sold the Vale vineyards to pay the transport cost?" Kael's jaw tightened. "This is not about gratitude." "No," she said quietly. "It is about ownership. You believed everything I built became yours simply because I loved you." For a moment something flickered in his face. Shame perhaps, but pride crushed it almost instantly. He told her the sunrise ceremony would stabilize the kingdom, that Ravencroft's army would secure the north, that once the crisis passed, they could discuss what came next. Alara almost laughed. He still believed there would be a next after publicly burying their marriage. Before Kael left, she asked the question that had been cutting at her since Seraphine returned. "Do you truly believe the child she carries is yours?" His hand froze on the door. He did not turn around. The silence stretched. That was answer enough. Alara felt something colder than heartbreak settle inside her. "You don't," she whispered. Kael finally faced her. "I said I don't know. And yet you allow the court to call it your heir. Blackthorn needs Ravencroft. So, you are willing to put another man's child near your throne because the lie is useful." Kael's face hardened. "Politics requires sacrifices." Alara stared at him for a long moment. "You always say that when the sacrifice is me." This time Kael had no reply. Later that night, Beta Rowan came through the service passage rather than the main door. He placed a folded military dispatch in front of Alara. "These men have been following you for 6 days." The list contained 8 royal guards, all assigned under emergency authority. Alara searched the page. "Kael's signature?" Rowan shook his head. "None. The orders came through the council office using his seal." A chill moved through her. Someone had access to the king's authority without needing the king. Rowan lowered his voice. "There is more. The physician who first examined Lady Seraphine has disappeared. His assistant claims the pregnancy ledger was rewritten 2 days later." Alara's fingers tightened around the paper. "Who rewrote it?" "The original page is missing." Rowan looked toward the door. "And one of the maids who saw the ledger was found beneath the southern tower this evening." Alara pulled the wooden box from beneath the table and showed Rowan what she had collected. 6 dead servants, 2 altered medical records, 3 intercepted letters with the same strange black wax pressed beneath Seraphine's household seal. Rowan read in silence until his expression changed. One letter mentioned the true bloodline, and another warned that the unborn branch must be cut before the moonrise. Neither named Alara directly. They did not need to. Rowan looked at her stomach, then immediately away, as if afraid even recognition might endanger her. "You're carrying the king's child." Alara's silence confirmed it. Rowan exhaled slowly. "Does Kael know?" "No." "Then we tell him now." Alara shook her head. "Not until we know who controls his seal. If the person hunting this child sits close enough to issue royal orders, telling Kael may only tell them faster." Rowan hated the logic because he could not defeat it. Instead, he helped Alara trace the commands through palace records. The trail led through 3 offices and ended at a sealed council registry only senior elders could access. Before they could identify who had opened it, footsteps sounded outside. Rowan disappeared through the side passage just as Seraphine entered with 2 maids and a smile that looked almost cheerful. "Still working?" she asked. "How devoted?" Ilara watched her carefully. Seraphine's hand was again resting on her stomach. The gesture had become theatrical. "You should rest," Ilara said. "Pregnancy can be delicate." For the first time, Seraphine's face changed. Only for a second, but Ilara saw it a flash of suspicion. "What would you know about pregnancy?" she asked. The cruelty was deliberate, but Ilara focused on something else. Seraphine had not reacted like a woman protecting a secret child. She had reacted like a woman afraid Ilara knew too much. Ilara stepped closer. "More than you think." Seraphine's eyes sharpened. Then she smiled again. "At sunrise, none of it will matter. You will be gone, and Blackthorn will finally have a Luna who can give its king what he needs." She turned to leave, but paused at the doorway. "You should leave quietly, Ilara. Women who cling to crowns after they are unwanted tend to meet unfortunate ends." The threat was wrapped in silk, but it was still a threat. Ilara waited until Seraphine disappeared before locking the door. She did not sleep. Near the darkest hour before dawn, the candle beside her bed suddenly went out. Ilara opened her eyes. No wind moved through the room. A faint scrape came from the balcony. She rolled from the mattress an instant before a blade came down where her body had been. A masked man lunged from the darkness. Ilara caught his wrist, drove her elbow into his throat, and stumbled backward as another knife flashed. He did not strike at her chest. He did not aim for her throat. Every movement drove toward her abdomen. Terror became certainty. This was no assassin sent merely to remove a disgraced Luna. This man knew. Ilara grabbed the iron candle stand and swung it into his temple. He staggered. She screamed, and guards pounded toward the door. The assassin turned to flee, but Ilara caught his cloak and ripped away a small leather pouch tied at his waist. He spun back, drove a short blade into his own side, and collapsed before the guards burst inside. Rowan arrived seconds later. Blood spread beneath the assassin as Ilara knelt beside him. She seized his collar. "Who sent you?" His breathing turned wet and shallow. His eyes moved toward her stomach. For one terrible second, they held something almost like pity. Then he whispered, "The heir must never be born." His body went still. Rowan opened the leather pouch. Inside was a black cord, identical to the one found on Mara's wrist, and a small piece of parchment marked with a symbol neither of them had seen before. A crown split down the middle by a silver blade. Ilara stared at it as cold understanding crept through her. Someone inside Blackthorn had been planning this long before Seraphine returned. The mistress, the false pregnancy, the sunrise ceremony, perhaps none of them were the true plot. Perhaps they were only distractions designed to place the wrong child near the throne while the real heir died unseen. Beyond the palace windows, the eastern sky remained black. Dawn was still hours away, but Ilara finally understood the shape of the danger surrounding her. She was not being hunted because Kale no longer wanted her. She was being hunted because the child inside her terrified someone powerful enough to command killers with the king's own seal. The assassin's body had not yet gone cold when High Priestess Malus arrived through the hidden passage beneath the eastern wing. She took one look at the black cord in Rowan's hand, then at the split crown symbol on the parchment, and all color drained from her face. Ilara had seen Malus stand calmly through battlefield funerals, plague winters, and the execution of traitors. She had never seen fear in the old woman's eyes until now. "We cannot stay here," Malus said. Rowan immediately moved toward the door, but Ilara did not. She looked down at the dead man, then at the blood on the floor, where her unborn child had almost died before Kale even knew of its existence. Something inside her hardened. "No more running blind," she said. "You know what that symbol means. Tell me now." Malus hesitated, and that hesitation frightened Ilara more than any answer. They moved before the palace guards could be replaced by men whose loyalty they could not trust. Beneath the abandoned Luna Chapel, Malus opened a stone door hidden behind the altar, revealing a narrow staircase descending into the earth. The passage ended in a chamber carved directly into black rock, its walls covered with ancient wolf sigils and the names of rulers dead for centuries. At the center stood a basin of pale moonstone filled with water that glowed faintly without flame. Malus locked the door behind them. "The split crown was the mark of the Veiled Council," she said. "An old faction created generations ago to ensure no Alpha King ever became powerful enough to rule without the Elders." Rowan frowned. "The Veiled Council was destroyed." Malus looked at him sadly. "That is what every king was taught." Ilara felt the child move, or perhaps she only imagined it beneath the weight of fear. Malus asked her to place both hands over the moonstone basin. The water brightened beneath her touch, silver light climbing through the veins of her wrists. Rowan stepped back in shock. Alara had expected confirmation of the pregnancy, nothing more. Instead, a second pulse appeared in the water, small but strong, surrounded by a ring of pale gold. Malus closed her eyes. The child carries the first alpha mark. Alara stared at her. What does that mean? The priestess explained that in the oldest Blackthorn records, before the 12 packs became separate kingdoms, the first royal bloodline carried a rare mark capable of binding pack oaths across territorial lines. It had disappeared for nearly 2 centuries. If this child is born and recognized, Malus said, the old council privileges end. No elder can overrule the crown through blood law again. The meaning landed with brutal clarity. The child was not being hunted because someone wanted Kael's throne. The child was being hunted because its very existence could destroy a system of power that had survived behind kings for generations. Rowan swore under his breath. Alara said nothing. She was thinking about Mara, about the servant found beneath the watchtower, about her first pregnancy years ago, and the sudden bleeding that had stolen the child before anyone outside her chamber knew she was carrying. At the time, Malus had blamed the aftermath of the silver wound. Now Ilara remembered the bitter tea delivered by a palace attendant that same evening. She had never questioned it. "My first child," she whispered. Malus looked away. That was all Ilara needed. "You suspected." The priestess's silence became confession. Malus admitted she had found traces of nightshade and powdered silver in the cup after the miscarriage, but there had been no proof of who sent it. Kael had been recovering from war wounds, the kingdom was unstable, and Alara herself had begged Malus not to burden him with more grief. "I thought whoever did it had failed and disappeared," Malus said. "I was wrong." Ilara turned away, pressing both hands against the stone table because her knees suddenly felt weak. For years, she had blamed her own body. She had listened to court whispers calling her barren. She had endured Seraphine's cruelty in silence because she believed the wound she took for Kael had made motherhood impossible. Now she understood that someone had stolen her first child deliberately. The grief she had buried did not return as tears, it returned as rage. While Alara remained hidden below the temple, Kael was tearing Blackthorn apart above ground. The attempted assassination had reached him minutes after Rowan vanished with Alara. He stormed through the eastern chamber and found blood on the floor, a shattered candle stand, and the assassin's discarded blade. When a guard reported that the attacker had repeatedly aimed for Alara's abdomen, Kael went still. A memory returned to him, Ilara's hand pressing briefly over her stomach as she left the banquet. Another memory followed the strange way she had avoided wine for weeks, the sudden paleness, the temple visits she had dismissed as prayer. He turned on the royal physician. "Is my Luna pregnant?" The physician's face betrayed him before his mouth did. "I was never permitted to examine her, Your Majesty." Kael's rage became something colder. He ordered every gate sealed and every council office searched. For the first time, he stopped protecting Seraphine from suspicion. He summoned her into the war chamber and asked a single question. "Who examined you?" Seraphine smiled too quickly. "Why does that matter?" Kael stepped closer. "Because the physician whose name appears on your pregnancy record disappeared before the ink dried." The smile vanished. Seraphine claimed ignorance, then accused Alara of forging documents out of jealousy. Kael listened without interrupting, but something had shifted inside him. For weeks, he had accepted explanations because they were convenient. Now, every convenient answer sounded like a trap. He searched the sealed registry himself and discovered reports he had never signed. Surveillance orders on Alara, transfers of guards from the Luna Wing, requests for restricted poisons, and authorization to use his royal seal during emergency succession matters. Each document had passed through the office of Grand Elder Malric. Kael stared at the name for a long time. Malric had taught him to read military maps when he was 6. Malric had held the crown during his father's funeral. Malric had once stood between Kael and a blade during the succession riots. If there was one man in Blackthorn Kael had never thought to question, it was him. That was precisely why the realization felt like the floor beneath the kingdom had begun to move. Kael found Alara at the Moon Temple, before dawn's first gray touched the horizon. Rowan tried to stop him at the entrance, but Alara allowed him inside. When Kael saw her standing beside the glowing basin, one hand resting protectively over her stomach, everything he had refused to understand became undeniable. His face changed. "You're carrying my child." Alara did not soften. Yes. The word struck him harder than accusation. Kale took one step forward, then stopped when she moved back. The distance between them was only a few feet, but it might as well have been a battlefield. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. Ilara's laugh held no humor. "Because the last maid who carried my pregnancy herbs was murdered. Because someone used your seal to place guards outside my door. Because an assassin came for my stomach while you were preparing to crown another woman's child." Kale flinched. "I didn't know. You didn't want to know." Her voice remained quiet, which made every word sharper. "You knew Seraphine's child might not be yours. You knew she was humiliating me. You knew the rumors were poisoning this court. But the lie was useful, so you allowed it." Kale looked stricken. "I was trying to prevent war, and I was the price." Ilara finally faced him fully. "Do not stand here and tell me Seraphine deceived you, as though deception absolves choice. She fed your pride. She did not create it." The words left Kale without defense. He had blamed politics, fear, the council, Ravencroft, everything except the one truth he could no longer escape. No one had forced him to say she meant nothing. Malus then revealed the first alpha mark and the significance of the unborn child. Kale listened in stunned silence as she explained the veiled council, the blood law, and the ancient privileges that would collapse if the true heir survived. But the worst blow came when Alara told him about their first lost child. She described the bitter tea, the traces of poison, the servant who disappeared, and the suspicion that the miscarriage had never been natural. Kale's face emptied. He remembered that night. Ilara had told him she was sick from the silver wound. He had held her while she shook, never knowing she had already lost their child. "You carried that alone?" he whispered. Ilara looked at him with exhausted sadness. "I carried many things alone while standing beside you." Rowan entered before Kale could answer. He carried a sealed ledger taken from the old council archive. "We found the original guard rotations from the night of Lady Ilara's first miscarriage." He opened the book. 3 names had been altered later, but beneath scraped ink, one authorization remained visible: Grand Elder Malric. Rowan had also found payments made to the missing physician who examined Seraphine, all routed through estates controlled by council proxies. Worse, one coded message referenced the substitute bloodline and ordered that Seraphine's child be recognized before the true branch awakens. Kale stared at the evidence, as though each line carved another wound into him. The man who had raised him had known about Ilara's pregnancies. He had known before Kale did. Seraphine's deception became clearer with the physician's original notes. Her child was not Kale's. Bloodline testing had shown markers belonging to the Ashenridge line, a rival alpha house tied financially to several senior elders. Seraphine had been promised protection, rank, and recognition as Luna if she cooperated. But one detail remained uncertain: whether she knew the true purpose of the plan or believed she was merely replacing Ilara. Ilara did not care enough to grant her innocence. Seraphine had stood in her chair, worn her mating necklace, mocked her lost fertility, and allowed another child to be presented as Kael's heir. Whatever she did not know, she had known enough to choose cruelty. The final proof came not as a document, but as a command. A horn sounded above the temple, followed by the pounding of armored boots outside. Rowan drew his sword. Kale turned sharply toward the door. A royal herald's voice echoed from the courtyard, amplified by the stone walls. By order of the Crown Council, Luna Ilara Vale was to be arrested for treason, falsifying a royal pregnancy, and attempting to place an illegitimate child in the line of succession. Kale's face went white. "I gave no such order." Rowan looked at him grimly. "It bears your seal." Ilara closed her eyes for 1 second. There it was, the trap tightening, exactly as planned. Kael stormed toward the entrance, but Malus caught his arm. "If you expose yourself now without knowing which guards belong to Malric, they may kill her before you reach the courtyard." Kael looked back at Ilara. For the first time since becoming king, he appeared uncertain not because of politics, but because he finally understood how little control he actually had. Someone had his seal. Someone commanded his guards. Someone had manipulated his council, his mistress, his succession, and perhaps even the death of his first child. And because Kale had been too proud to listen to the woman beside him, he had helped that enemy isolate her. Outside, the herald repeated the order. Ilara picked up the moonstone seal and fastened it beneath her cloak. "They want me dragged into the great hall before sunrise," she said. Rowan asked what she intended to do. Alara looked toward the hidden passage leading back beneath the palace. Then I will go. Kale stared at her. That is exactly what Malric wants. No, Alara replied. He wants me frightened, hidden, and easy to call guilty. If he wants a public trial, I will give him one. She looked directly at Kale. But this time, Your Majesty, when they ask what I am to you, choose your answer carefully. Above them, Blackthorn's arrest bells began to ring. In the Great Hall, Grand Elder Malric had already taken his seat beside the empty throne, waiting for the Luna to be brought before him in chains. And for the first time, Kale understood that the greatest enemy of his reign had never stood beyond Blackthorn's walls. He had been standing at Kale's shoulder since childhood. Ilara entered the Blackthorn Great Hall in chains just as the final hour before dawn began. The same nobles who had watched her humiliation earlier now rose in stunned silence as armed guards dragged her across the black marble floor. Her wrists were bound with silver restraints meant for traitors, and though the metal burned her skin, she refused to bend her head. Kale stood near the throne rather than on it, fury carved into every line of his face. Beside the royal seat sat Grand Elder Malric, calm and composed in ceremonial black, as though he, not the Alpha King, had summoned the kingdom to judgment. Seraphine stood on the opposite side wearing the Luna cloak again, but her confidence had changed. She kept glancing toward Malric, as if waiting for instructions. Alara saw it immediately. Seraphine had never been the hand holding the knife. She had only been polished into its blade. Malric rose and unrolled a parchment bearing Kale's royal seal. Luna Ilera Vale is charged with falsifying a royal pregnancy, conspiring with moon priests to alter the succession, and attempting to place an illegitimate child upon the Blackthorn throne. The accusation spread through the hall like poison. Several elders shouted in outrage. Others looked uncertain. Malric raised one hand, silencing them with practiced authority. The evidence is clear. At sunrise, His Majesty will dissolve the mating bond, recognize Lady Seraphine as royal consort, and secure the succession before civil war tears this kingdom apart. Kale's eyes hardened. I issued no such order. Malric looked almost disappointed. Your Majesty has been under considerable emotional pressure. The council acted under emergency law. Kale stared at the man who had taught him that law as a child, and suddenly understood how carefully Malric had built this cage around him. Ilara did not defend herself immediately. Instead, she looked at Seraphine. Tell them who fathered your child. Seraphine's face tightened. Malric answered for her. Irrelevant. Then it should be easy to answer. Ilara stepped forward despite the chains. If this child is meant to inherit Blackthorn, prove its blood. A murmur rose among the Alpha Lords. Seraphine's hand moved protectively toward her stomach, but not with tenderness, with fear. Kale turned to her. Seraphine, she swallowed. You know what we agreed. The words escaped before she could stop them. The hall went quiet. Kale's expression changed. No, he said slowly. I knew the court believed the child might be mine. I never agreed to falsify blood. Seraphine looked toward Malric for help. He did not even look back at her. That single dismissal told Ilara everything about how much Seraphine truly mattered to the people she had betrayed others to impress. Rowan entered through the western doors carrying the missing physician's original ledger. Behind him came 2 royal guards escorting a pale, terrified man in torn traveling clothes. Seraphine recoiled the moment she saw him. Dr. Varen, Rowan announced, found hidden in an estate registered to one of Grand Elder Malric's council stewards. The physician fell to his knees. He confessed that Seraphine's blood test had never matched Kale's lineage. The unborn child carried markers from Ashenridge, a rival Alpha House long allied with several conservative elders. He had been ordered to rewrite the record and disappear after the sunrise ceremony. The great hall exploded into shouting. Seraphine stepped backward, whispering that she had been promised protection. Malric finally turned toward her with cold contempt. You were promised what was necessary to secure your cooperation. Her face went white. For the first time, Seraphine understood that she had not been chosen. She had been used. Malric did not deny it. Instead, he smiled. You all speak as if this is betrayal. It is preservation. He looked directly at Kyle. Your father understood the danger of unchecked blood. His father understood it before him. A king who can unite the 12 packs without council restraint becomes a tyrant. We maintained balance. Kale's voice dropped. By murdering my children? Malric's calm finally cracked. By preventing a bloodline that would erase every ancient safeguard. Ilara's stomach twisted. There it was, spoken aloud. Her first child had not died by accident. Malric had ordered the poison. The servants who disappeared had been witnesses. The false heir, the Northern War, the shortages, Seraphine's return, all of it had been engineered to force Kael into a succession the council could control. Malric had not merely manipulated a king. He had manufactured an entire crisis around his deepest fears. Kael moved toward him, but Malric raised the decree. One more step, and every northern garrison receives the order to abandon Blackthorn. He revealed that the border attacks Kael had feared were coordinated with commanders already bought by the Veiled Council. Grain convoys had been deliberately delayed. Pact disputes had been inflamed through forged letters. Even the reports claiming Alara secretly contacted rival alphas had been fabricated. "You needed Ravencroft," Malric said. "So we made certain you believed you did." Kael looked toward Alara, horror replacing anger. Every cruel choice he had justified as necessary had been built upon lies. But Alara gave him no comfort. Malric had created the trap, yet Kael had chosen how to behave inside it. That truth still stood between them like a wall. Then Malric gave Kael the final choice. Sign the dissolution decree, recognize Seraphine's child as temporary heir, and Malric would order the northern commanders to stand down. Refuse, and Blackthorn would wake to rebellion at every gate. The hall erupted again. Elders begged Kael to consider the kingdom. Seraphine began crying, insisting none of this had been her idea. Ilara remained silent. She knew the cruelty of the decision because she had lived beneath it for weeks. Kael could save his throne by sacrificing her one last time. His eyes moved from the parchment to Ilara's silver-burned wrists, then to the place where her unborn child rested. The memory of his own words returned with unbearable clarity. "She means nothing to me." He had already chosen once. Now the entire kingdom waited to see whether he would choose differently. Kael took the decree from Malric. For one terrible second, Alara thought he might sign it. Then he tore the parchment straight down the center. The sound ripped through the hall. "Alara Vale is my Luna," he said, voice carrying to the highest gallery. "The child she carries is mine, and any council law requiring me to murder my family for a crown can burn with the men who wrote it." Malric's face hardened. Kael dropped the torn decree at his feet. "You taught me that a king who cannot protect his own blood cannot protect a kingdom. I finally understand what you meant." For the first time that night, Malric looked afraid. Then he lifted 2 fingers. Hidden soldiers along the upper balconies drew their swords. Chaos erupted instantly. Steel flashed. Loyal guards collided with Malric's men between banquet tables. Nobles scattered as arrows struck pillars and shattered glass. Rowan cut through the guards holding Alara and snapped the chain between her wrists. Kael drove toward Malric, but 3 council soldiers blocked him. Seraphine screamed and tried to flee through the side doors, only to find them barred. Malric shouted an order to seize Alara alive. "The child dies first." That command froze something inside Kael. He abandoned Malric and turned toward Alara, just as a masked warrior lunged from behind her with a silver blade angled directly at her abdomen. Kael crossed the distance before thought could stop him. The weapon sank beneath his ribs instead. Ilara caught him as he staggered. Blood spread rapidly across his white ceremonial shirt. Kael's knees hit the floor. For one heartbeat, the fighting around them disappeared. He looked down at the blade buried in his side, then at Alara. "Not this time," he whispered. The words broke something in her because she understood exactly what he meant. Earlier that night, he had watched her stand alone because protecting her had seemed too politically expensive. Now he had taken Silver into his own body without hesitation. But redemption could not erase consequence. Ilara pressed both hands against his wound, while Rowan killed the attacker. Kael's blood soaked through her fingers, warm and frighteningly fast. "Stay awake," she ordered. "You do not get to die, and leave me with all of this." A weak, painful smile touched his mouth. "Still giving your king orders. You are not my king right now." Rowan finally reached Malric's platform with the recovered ledgers and shouted for the fighting to stop. He held up proof of payments, forged seals, altered troop orders, and the physician's testimony. Several soldiers who had been fighting for Malric lowered their weapons when they realized the rebellion had been built on lies. Malric tried to invoke council authority, but Elder Corvin stood and publicly denounced him. One by one, other Alpha Lords followed. Seraphine attempted to slip behind the throne, but Rowan blocked her path. "Where are you going, future Luna?" he asked coldly. She stared at him with tears and fury. Around her, Nobles who had bowed to her only hours earlier now looked at her with disgust. The stolen Luna cloak suddenly seemed less like a symbol of victory and more like evidence wrapped around her shoulders. But Malric had prepared one last blow. Before Rowan could arrest him, a horn sounded from the northern tower. Then another answered from the western wall. A messenger burst into the hall shouting that council troops had seized the city gates and that Blackthorn's royal seal had been used to declare Kyle mentally unfit to rule. Malric laughed, even with swords pointed at him. "You may expose me here, boy, but the kingdom has already received its new orders." He pointed toward the throne. "By sunrise, you will have no crown to defend." Kale tried to stand, nearly collapsing from blood loss. Alara caught his arm. "Stop!" His eyes went to the throne, then back to her. She could see the instinct tearing him apart, the king wanting to run toward his crown, the man refusing to leave her again. Kale reached up with shaking hands and removed the black gold crown from his head. The entire hall watched as he placed it on the blood-stained floor between himself and Alara. "Let them take the throne," he said. "I will not trade you for it again." Outside, the bells of Blackthorn began ringing the signal of royal overthrow. Somewhere beyond the palace walls, Malric's forces were already raising new banners over the gates. Alara stared at the crown lying at her feet and understood the cruel symmetry of the night. Hours earlier, Kale had humiliated her because he feared losing power. Now he had chosen her and lost it anyway. The first gray line of dawn appeared beyond the eastern windows. Kale had saved Alara's life, exposed Seraphine's false heir, and finally turned against the man who had controlled him since childhood. None of it changed the fact that Blackthorn was falling. None of it restored the trust he had shattered, and none of it guaranteed that their child would survive what came next. Alara looked toward the ringing towers while Kyle bled beside her, and Malric smiled through his defeat. There was less than 1 hour before sunrise. If Alara wanted to save Blackthorn now, she would have to do something no Luna had dared in generations: take the fate of the throne out of the Alpha King's hands entirely. The bells of Blackthorn were still screaming rebellion when Alara bent beside Kale and pulled the royal crown away from the spreading pool of his blood. She did not place it back on his head. Instead, she carried it to the center of the great hall and laid it on the moonstone floor where every Alpha could see it. No one wears this until the 12 packs decide who still deserves it. The command did not sound like something spoken by a discarded Luna. It sounded like judgment. Kale, pale from the silver wound beneath his ribs, did not protest. Malric did. He laughed from between the swords surrounding him and declared that a woman stripped of her title had no authority to suspend a king. Alara slowly removed the moonstone seal from beneath her cloak. The instant its silver light spread across the hall, several older Alphas dropped to one knee. Malric's laughter died. He had planned for Alara's grief. He had never planned for her to stop asking permission. High Priestess Malus entered through the western doors with Elder Corvin and 3 messengers carrying the ancient banners of Silverfang, Moonridge, and Frostvale. Alara pressed the moonstone seal into the ceremonial basin beside the throne and invoked a law Blackthorn had not used for more than a century. When the royal line, the council, and the succession were simultaneously compromised, the Luna carrying the recognized heir could summon the 12 packs and freeze all claims to the crown until public judgment. Malric shouted that the law had been abolished. Malus answered that men like him had merely hidden it. Outside the palace, horns began answering one another from beyond the city walls. One by one, allied banners appeared in the gray darkness. The packs had not come because Kale called them. They had come because Alara had sent messages before the banquet, when she first realized the palace might be preparing to destroy her. Malric's expression finally cracked. He had believed Alara isolated because Kale had humiliated her publicly. He had mistaken humiliation for helplessness. Alpha after Alpha entered the hall and placed sealed testimony before the throne. Silverfang produced the forged letters Malric had used to provoke border aggression. Moonridge presented proof that council agents had paid merchants to delay grain shipments. Frostvale brought 2 surviving guards who admitted receiving orders to watch Alara and report any sign of pregnancy. Rowan added the physician's ledger, the false bloodline record, and the names of servants murdered after discovering too much. The evidence did not arrive as one dramatic revelation. It arrived in layers, each one stripping Malric of another lie until even the soldiers loyal to him began stepping away. By the time the first pale line of sunrise touched the high windows, Malric no longer looked like the architect of a kingdom. He looked like an old man, surrounded by the consequences he had spent decades believing would never reach him. Seraphine tried to save herself before anyone could formally accuse her. She tore the Luna cloak from her shoulders and threw it onto the floor as though the fabric itself had betrayed her. "He used me!" she cried, pointing at Malric. "He promised my child would be protected. He said Kale would never accept Alara again once the court believed I carried the heir." Malric did not even bother denying it. He looked at Seraphine with open contempt and said she had been useful because vanity made her obedient. The words struck her harder than any blow. Alara watched Seraphine realize, perhaps for the first time, that everything she had done to another woman had been done to her in return. She had treated Alara as disposable because she thought becoming Luna would make her indispensable. Yet Malric had always planned to remove her once the false heir was secured. Alara stepped towards Seraphine and placed one final letter on the table. Rowan had found it hidden among Malric's private documents. It stated that once the child was recognized and Alara eliminated, Seraphine could be quietly sent away before she developed political ambitions of her own. The father of her child, an Ashenridge Alpha, had already agreed to deny ever knowing her. Seraphine stared at the letter until her lips began trembling. "You knew?" she whispered to Malric. He answered without emotion. "You wanted a crown. I gave you something shiny enough to keep you useful." Seraphine broke then, not with dignity but with rage. She lunged at him, screaming that she had betrayed everyone for the future he promised. Guards restrained her before she reached him. Alara felt no triumph watching her collapse, only the cold understanding that people who build their happiness on another person's humiliation eventually discover how unstable stolen ground can be. Malric's judgment came quickly once the 12 packs voted. He was stripped of rank, property, council authority, and the right to carry an alpha name. More painfully, his crimes were read aloud before every pack represented in the hall. The poisoning of Alara's first pregnancy, the murder of palace servants, the manipulation of the northern conflict, the falsification of succession records, and the attempted killing of the unborn heir. He had spent his life believing history would remember him as the man who preserved Blackthorn. Instead, history would remember him as the elder who murdered children to preserve his own influence. Seraphine was stripped of noble status and removed from the royal household. Her child would not be punished for her crimes, but neither would it ever be used as a political weapon. She was sent under guard to an isolated Ravencroft estate, without title, court, or influence, the exact thing she had sacrificed everyone else to possess. Then the hall turned toward Kale. That silence was different. Malric had been a traitor. Seraphine had been an opportunist. Kale was still their king, or had been only hours earlier. Rowan helped him stand despite the bandage beneath his ribs. The 12 packs gave him the simplest path back to power. If Alara publicly restored her confidence in him and placed the crown on his head, emergency law would recognize him until a formal council could be held. Hundreds of eyes moved toward her. Kale looked at the crown, then at Alara, and shook his head before she could speak. No. Elder Corvin asked whether he understood what he was refusing. Kale did. He stepped into the center of the hall without his crown and finally stopped searching for excuses. He admitted that Malric had deceived him, but deception was not the whole truth. He had known Seraphine's child might not be his. He had allowed the rumor because Ravencroft troops were useful. He had watched Seraphine take Alara's chair, wear her necklace, mock her inability to conceive, and still chosen silence because protecting Alara publicly might make him appear weak. Malric created the crisis, Kale said, his voice rough with pain. But he did not put those words in my mouth. He looked directly at Alara. I said she meant nothing because I believed she would endure anything and still remain beside me. I mistook her loyalty for something I owned. No one moved. The confession stripped him more completely than losing the crown. An Alpha King could survive being defeated by an enemy. It was harder to stand before his kingdom and admit that his greatest failure had been the way he treated the person who loved him most. The 12 packs suspended Kael's rule. He would not be imprisoned because he had broken Malric's coup, saved Alara, and confessed before judgment, but he would spend the coming months without royal command, rebuilding the northern villages damaged by the manufactured conflict, and answering directly to the council he once considered beneath him. Kael accepted every condition. Then Alara delivered the punishment no council could have invented. She announced that she would leave Blackthorn before the day ended. She would carry the true heir to Moon Sanctuary, neutral ground protected by the priestesses and recognized by all 12 packs. Kale would receive reports about the child's health, but he would have no authority to summon Alara back, claim her as Luna, or enter the sanctuary without invitation. The pain that crossed his face was immediate. Losing the throne had wounded his pride. Losing access to the woman and child he had almost sacrificed broke something much deeper. "Alara," he said, forgetting the hundreds of witnesses around them. She looked at him, and for the first time since the banquet, tears finally filled her eyes. "Do not make me stay because you are sorry now." Kale's mouth tightened. "I won't." That answer hurt her almost as much as the cruelty before, because it proved he finally understood what respect required. She stepped closer and placed the old Luna ring into his palm. "You can earn back a crown. You can rebuild an army. You can force enemies to kneel. But you cannot command trust back into a heart after you have taught it that loving you is dangerous." Kale closed his fingers around the ring. Alara did not ask whether he loved her. She already knew. Love had never been the problem. Love without loyalty, protection, and respect had become another form of abandonment. Months later, Kale arrived alone at Moon Sanctuary, wearing no royal colors. His hands were rough from rebuilding burned homes along the northern border, and a silver scar marked the place where he had taken the assassin's blade meant for Alara. He waited outside the sanctuary gates until Malus finally allowed him into the outer garden. Alara stood beneath a white-barked moon tree, holding a sleeping infant against her chest. Kale stopped so suddenly it seemed the world had struck him. His son had dark hair like his and Alara's gray eyes. For the first time since his birth, Kale saw the child he had nearly lost without ever knowing he existed. He did not reach for him. That restraint told Alara more about Kale's change than any apology could have. "He has your temper," Alara said softly. Kale almost smiled, but emotion broke through first. "I'm sorry." She shook her head. "Do not spend his childhood apologizing. Spend it becoming someone he will be proud to know." Kale looked at her for a long moment. "And you?" She understood the question. Was there anything left between them? Could a mate bond survive what trust had not? Alara looked down at their son, then back at the man who had finally learned that love did not grant ownership. "You did not lose my love that night, Kale," she said. "You lost my trust. And love without trust is just another cage." He swallowed hard. "Can trust return?" Alara answered honestly. "Maybe. But this time you will earn the answer." She turned toward the sanctuary with their child in her arms. Months earlier, Kale would have followed, ordered the gates opened, invoked his rights as Alpha King, husband, or father. Now he stayed where he was. The doors closed slowly between them, and Kale accepted the distance because he finally understood that respecting Alara's boundary was the first step toward deserving a place beyond it. He had regained the possibility of his throne. Malric was gone. Blackthorn was rebuilding. Yet the greatest victory of his life remained uncertain, because forgiveness could not be commanded and love could not be legislated. The woman he once called nothing had become the measure by which he understood everything he had nearly destroyed. And that was the true price Kale paid before sunrise. Not merely a crown, not merely public shame. He lost the certainty that the woman who loved him would always remain, no matter how deeply he wounded her. Alara's revenge was not killing him, humiliating him, or stealing his kingdom. It was refusing to keep sacrificing herself so that he could avoid the consequences of becoming cruel. If this story made you believe that loyalty should never be mistaken for weakness, tell me in the comments. Would you ever give Kale a second chance after what he did to Alara? And if you want more Alpha King stories where betrayal has a price and a forgotten Luna finally takes back her power, stay with us for the next story.